He has been issuing executive orders as if he were a king. He and his vice president and other Republicans have said that the courts, for example, don't have any role in restricting his powers.
Now, is the US still an ally of Europe, or are we on the cusp of a new world order, one in which the US is more closely aligned with Russia and China than Western Europe? I'm delighted to be joined by the American political scientist and author of the internationally acclaimed book, The End of History and the Last Man, Professor Francis Fukuyama. Professor, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for giving us your time.
Thank you very much for having me.
You've described this particular moment in history as the greatest shift in world order since the Cold War. Talk us through your thinking behind that.
Well, actually, I think it's the greatest shift since the end of World War II. The period since 1945 has been characterized by a moral understanding that world order really needs to be built on certain values, on principles of democracy, of human rights, of constitutional government. And that was the liberal world order that the United States, Britain, and other countries, many of them in the NATO alliance, sought to create over that time period. We thought we had made great advances with the collapse of the former Soviet Union in 1991 and the liberation of many Eastern European countries that had been held involuntarily under communist rule. But that seems to be in the process of reversing. The major event was the Russian invasion of Ukraine that started in 2014 and then became a full-scale war in 2022. And the United States has traditionally resisted that kind of aggression by an ambitious dictatorship. But now we have a president that doesn't seem to buy into this moral understanding of what's at stake here and seems to be switching the weight of the United States to the other side in that conflict. And so it's a utterly astonishing change that's taken place.
What do you think Trump's plan is for America? Some people said that, look, the whole administration is built to see the end of liberalism in the United States. Do you buy into that point of view?
Well, we have to define what liberalism is. I think the fundamental definition is not liberal conservative in American terms, but really, do you want a rule of law? Do you want constitutional constraints on the power of governments? And I think that he doesn't accept that in his second term. He has been issuing executive orders as if he were a king. He and his vice president and other Republicans have said that the courts, for example, don't have any role in restricting his powers. His Republican Congress has not stood up to him in any way. And so I think that, there's no clear red line that you cross when you cease being a liberal democracy, but I think that he is definitely moving the United States in that direction.
Professor, I wonder whether you've heard this clip I'm about to play you. I want to get your thoughts on it. This was at an event addressing Democrat and Republican governors at the White House on Friday. President Trump clashed with the governor of Maine, Janet Mills, on the issue of allowing trans women competing in women's sports. This is what he had to say.
The NCAA has complied immediately, by the way. That's good. But I understand Maine. Is Maine here, the governor of Maine?
Well, here.
Are you not going to comply with it?
I'm complying with state and federal laws.
We are the federal law. Well, you better do it. You better do it because you're not going to get any federal funding at all if you don't. And by the way, your population, even though it's somewhat liberal, although I did very well there, your population doesn't want men playing in women's sports. So you better comply because otherwise you're not getting any federal funding.
See you in court.
Every state, good, I'll see you in court. I look forward to that. That should be a real easy one. And enjoy your life after governor because I don't think you'll be in elected politics.
That was an exchange between Donald Trump and Janet Mills, the governor of Maine. Professor, what did you make of that exchange from Donald Trump? Some people have said, look, this is the way an autocrat behaves, but this is exactly what his supporters like about Donald Trump. This is what he was voted in to do. What are your thoughts?
Well, okay, first of all, you got to distinguish between a policy issue like should trans men compete in women's sport, trans women compete in uh, women's sports. You can have different opinions about that,
Of
but
course.
the dangerous thing here is that he's basically trying to undo American federalism. The Constitution delegates significant powers to states and localities, and he is trying to assert the federal government's sway. This is completely different from what every conservative Republican has maintained up to this point. They're all in favor of federalism. They don't want the federal government to be dictating detailed issues like who can compete in what kind of sports team. And now he's doing that. He's been doing that all over the place. He wants to allocate the way we here in California allocate our water, our stored water. He has tried to eliminate congestion pricing. New York, adopted London's system recently, and he wants to reverse that. And so it's a kind of detailed exercise of power on a local level that we've really never seen. And certainly we've never seen this from a conservative Republican before.
What do you think happens to America? I mean, we've got to remember that he's only been in power for a month. But what do you think happens to the fabric of the American system, the checks and balances, the separation of powers? How do you think that system is going to look? What do you think it's going to look like at the end of this term by President Trump?
Well, I think that we shouldn't panic because the single biggest check is still in place, and those are the courts, and especially the federal courts. And many of his commandments, his executive orders, have been challenged in court, like the birthright citizenship one, which is probably the most obviously unconstitutional. And I suspect that even Trump-appointed judges are not going to permit a lot of these things to go forward. Now, we don't know whether he will obey a legal ruling like that, even from his conservative Supreme Court, but that still remains, the major check on his power. The other check is a political one. His economic plans are crazy. I mean, he wants to replace the income tax with tariffs, and he wants to put tariffs on, the closest allies, including your country. And this is all going to be incredibly inflationary. I think that most ordinary Americans don't care about these legal issues all that much. They don't care that much about whether you're acting in fidelity with the Constitution, but they do care about inflation and they do care about, a tanking economy. And so I think that that's the other way that he could be stopped is if his policies lead to really unpopular outcomes and people just get sick and tired of it.
Professor, before we go, the main topic of conversation here in the UK and in Europe, and we must remember Germany goes to the polls tomorrow, and that's going to be a very significant result in the direction that Europe takes in the coming months. But the main question has been, is America a reliable ally right now?
Well, I hate to say this, but if I were a European, I would have serious questions about that. We thought that America was going to go back to normal when Biden was elected in 2020, and that Trump would simply be an episode. But he's got a pretty powerful base out there, and I think that even if the Democrats, come back in the midterm elections and then in the next presidential election, you're still going to have a country that's very divided, in which there's a significant number of Americans that don't think we have anything in common with Europeans. And, that's what I would worry about. So I don't know the answer to your question. I hope that it is not the case that we can't get back to agreement on these basic values, but I think they're being severely challenged right now.
And just finally, I promise this will be my last question. What happens to that world order we began this interview with when America takes this almost isolationist view of saying, look, we're going to pull back. We don't want to be the policeman of Europe. We certainly don't want to be paying for it. What happens to that world order? Do we see Europe emerge as a stronger power? Do we see it collapse because it's not sustainable without American US help? In your view, how is that world order going to settle? Where is it going to settle?
Well, I think the chance for serious instability is very great. I wish, in a way, that Trump were just an isolationist and wanting to pull back, but he seems to be actually actively promoting the territorial expansion of the United States, with Greenland and Panama and Gaza. And he seems to be actively siding with the authoritarian half of the world. If I were China, I would see this as a golden opportunity to finally reincorporate Taiwan
Mm.
because, Trump wants to incorporate Greenland. I think China's claim to Taiwan is probably stronger than the US claim to Greenland. And the United States, I can't imagine that Donald Trump will actually use the US military to defend that island from a Chinese blockade or attack. So I just think that we're in for a lot of trouble. I think every European country has really got to think much more seriously about defense and about collective defense without having to rely on the United States because that's the world we're heading into.